The International School's boardroom gleamed under cold fluorescent lights, the school logo mounted behind the administration panel. A thin, sharp laugh cut through the air. Aria Voss, black silk dress, arrogant eyes, leaned forward across the conference table. "Still remember me?" All eyes turned to Ethan, a man in a worker's shirt, wearing an emergency whistle around his neck. A few parents snickered. "Oh, old acquaintances, apparently." Ethan placed his school badge on the table in front of him, looked up with calm, warm, deliberate words. "A real friend never asks to be remembered. He simply stays until the fire is out." The sound of pens dropping. Faces fell silent. On the table before Aria, a charred metal hair clip trembled slightly. Ethan Harper's morning had started like any other, checking fire extinguishers and emergency lighting in the International Academy's upper campus. At 38, his hands carried the steady confidence of someone who understood that safety systems were only as reliable as the people who maintained them. By lunch, he was sitting in the same building, but in a very different capacity, as a parent attending the PTA meeting for his daughter Mia's class. The topic, a proposal to separate students who don't meet the criteria for participation in premium music and sports clubs. Ethan wore his work shirt, still bearing faint chalk marks from checking emergency exit signs. The emergency whistle hung around his neck, a habit formed after an incident years ago that he rarely discussed. To most parents in the room, he looked exactly like what he was, a maintenance worker who probably didn't belong in discussions about academic excellence. His daughter Mia sat quietly in the corner, clutching her attendance booklet with its carefully collected achievement stickers. "Daddy, look! I got my 50th gold leaf today," she had whispered earlier, her eyes bright with pride. She had also mentioned something else that caught Ethan's attention. "There's a beautiful lady named Miss Aria who gave our whole class new art supplies. She promised to sponsor our school play too." Aria Voss commanded the room from the moment she entered. The Voss Foundation had returned to sponsor the school, and she was both a distinguished alumna and the youngest billionaire in the city. Her presence drew whispered conversations. "That's the Voss daughter. She used to play violin here. Everyone wants her endorsement." She carried herself with the fluid confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in any room, her designer dress impeccable, her smile calculated for maximum effect. The PTA chairwoman, herself wealthy and sharp-tongued, had noticed Ethan's presence with barely concealed disdain. "Are you the maintenance worker?" she asked with a thin smile. "This meeting is for parents who contribute financially to the school programs." Ethan's response was characteristically calm. "I contribute by making sure the emergency exits stay lit and functional." The comment drew awkward chuckles around the room. Several parents exchanged glances, clearly amused by what they saw as a working-class father trying to justify his presence among his social betters. Aria leaned back in her chair, drumming her manicured fingers against an old violin case that sat beneath the table. The case showed its age, worn leather and faded clasp that spoke of years of careful use. But there was something else about it, a detail that would have meant nothing to most observers. Faint scorch marks along one edge, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. The meeting proceeded with the typical bureaucratic formality of school politics. Parents discussed funding priorities, academic standards, and the perpetual challenge of maintaining the school's prestigious reputation. But beneath the surface, Ethan could sense the real agenda. This wasn't just about academic excellence. It was about creating barriers, establishing hierarchies, ensuring that certain types of families remained in their designated places. As the discussion continued, his trained eye automatically cataloged the room's safety features. Emergency exits clearly marked, fire suppression system recently updated, evacuation routes properly posted. Everything designed to protect people when ordinary circumstances turned dangerous. Which was exactly what was about to happen, though not in any way the emergency planners had anticipated. Mia looked up from her achievement booklet, watching the adults with the careful attention that children bring to situations they don't fully understand but somehow sense are important. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to see how far this parent meeting story travels. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the moment that will make the entire room freeze. Now, back to the story. During the brief break, the hallway buzzed with typical PTA politics. Parents clustered in small groups, discussing everything from fundraising targets to the upcoming spring concert. But the conversations had an edge to them, a subtle sorting that separated the influential from the merely present. A well-dressed father approached Ethan with the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. You know, if your daughter doesn't qualify for the advanced programs, the public school system has some excellent, basic options. Ethan watched Mia flip through her achievement booklet, counting the gold leaf stickers she had earned through perfect attendance and completed assignments. He knelt down to her level, speaking quietly but firmly. You belong wherever you work hard and learn well, not where other people think you should be. That's when Arya made her approach. She moved with the fluid confidence of someone accustomed to being the center of attention, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Parents naturally stepped aside to let her pass, creating a clear path to where Ethan stood with his daughter. Her smile was carefully calibrated, warm enough to seem friendly, sharp enough to suggest hidden knowledge. "Still remember me?" she asked, her tone casual but pitched just loud enough for nearby parents to hear. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Several parents slowed their conversations, sensing drama about to unfold. Someone whispered, "A past romance, maybe?" Another voice added, "Working-class boy meets rich girl?" Ethan didn't take the bait. His response was characteristically practical. "I remember emergency exit routes," he said simply, turning his attention to the evacuation diagram mounted on the hallway wall. It was the kind of reflexive behavior that came from years of ensuring people's safety, checking systems, noting potential problems, planning for situations that hopefully would never occur. But Arya wasn't finished. She followed his gaze to the safety diagram, then gestured toward the upper floors. "Some routes are more memorable than others, don't you think?" The comment seemed innocuous enough to casual observers, but there was something in her tone that suggested layers of meaning. Mia looked up from her sticker book, pointing to something that caught her attention. "Daddy, her violin case has the same kind of marks as your whistle." The observation was innocent, the kind of detail that only children notice and adults typically miss. But both Ethan and Arya heard it clearly. Arya's violin case, worn and well-traveled, bore faint scorch marks along one edge. Ethan's emergency whistle, hanging from its lanyard, showed similar signs of heat damage. Metal slightly discolored, surface marked by exposure to extreme temperatures. The hallway suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier with unspoken history. They moved toward the library, ostensibly to review the school's emergency procedures that Ethan had mentioned. But the space felt charged with tension, two people circling around a shared past that neither was ready to address directly. In the library, Ethan noticed immediately that the emergency notification board was outdated. The evacuation plan showed the building's layout from 2 renovations ago, missing the new arts wing and the reconfigured upper floors. "The exit routes for the music rooms are wrong," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "If there was an emergency during rehearsal—" "Always the safety inspector," Arya interrupted, but her voice lacked its earlier sharpness. "Some things never change." "Tuh. Some things shouldn't change," Ethan replied, making notes on the outdated diagram, "like making sure people can get out when they need to." The principal approached, looking harried and slightly annoyed. "Mr. Harper, we appreciate your observations, but we have a very busy schedule today. The donor's reception requires our full attention." It was a polite dismissal, the kind of bureaucratic brush-off that prioritized public relations over practical concerns. The message was clear. Fundraising trumped fire safety, at least for today. A parent laughed nearby. "You're talking about emergency exits while Arya is discussing quality standards? Maybe focus on what actually matters." The humiliation was subtle but effective. Ethan was being positioned as someone who worried about trivial details while important people discussed important things. But Mia was watching everything with the sharp attention that children bring to adult conflicts. She saw her father being dismissed, saw the way other parents looked at him like he was somehow less worthy of attention than the woman in the expensive dress. "Daddy," she whispered, tugging on his sleeve, "why don't they want to listen about the safe way out?" It was a child's question, but it cut to the heart of something larger. In a room full of adults focused on status and influence, an 8-year-old was the only one asking why safety mattered less than the social standing. Arya overheard the question, and for the first time since the conversation began, her carefully constructed composure flickered. Something in the child's innocent confusion seemed to trigger a memory, a reminder of another time when safety had been the only thing that mattered. She looked down at her violin case, her fingers unconsciously tracing the scorch marks that matched the damage on Ethan's whistle. The past was pushing against the present, and soon it would be impossible to keep the two separated. But that moment was still coming. For now, the hallway conversation continued, with parents discussing programs and priorities, while Ethan quietly noted which emergency exits needed better lighting and clearer signage. The collision between past and present was building pressure like steam in a closed system, waiting for the moment when someone would finally say what everyone was carefully avoiding. The main session reconvened with the sterile efficiency of institutional bureaucracy. Parents filed back into the boardroom, taking their designated seats around the polished conference table. The afternoon light filtered through tall windows, casting sharp shadows across the room's formal atmosphere. The PTA chairwoman called for order, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to controlling conversations. Before we proceed with budget allocations, let's address the quality standardization proposal for our premium programs. Several parents nodded approvingly. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the chance to formally establish barriers that would ensure their children's advantages remained unchallenged by less privileged peers. "We need to maintain excellence," declared a father whose donation history granted him considerable influence. "Our music and athletics programs should prioritize students with proper foundations and suitable backgrounds." Eyes briefly glanced toward Mia and two other children whose families clearly didn't fit the intended demographic. The message was subtle but unmistakable. Some children simply didn't belong in elite programs. Arya leaned forward with the predatory grace of someone about to make a decisive move. Her smile was sharp, calculated to demonstrate her position in the room's hierarchy. "Quality requires standards," she said, her voice carrying across the table. "We can't let sentiment cloud our judgment. Not everyone has what it takes for excellence." Then she turned directly toward Ethan, her expression shifting to something more personal, more cutting. "Still remember me?" she asked for the second time, but now her tone was clearer, more pointed. The question was a challenge delivered in front of the entire assembly, designed to establish dominance and perhaps humiliate someone who had dared to question her earlier. The room fell silent, sensing drama about to unfold. Several parents exchanged glances, recognizing the setup for what it was: a public demonstration of social hierarchy, a billionaire putting a maintenance worker in his proper place. Ethan didn't flinch. He reached for his school identification badge and placed it deliberately on the table in front of him. The simple gesture commanded attention through its very quietness. When he looked up, his voice carried the calm authority of someone who had faced real crisis and emerged with his principles intact. "A real friend never asks to be remembered," he said, each word measured and clear. "He simply stays until the fire is out." The words landed like a physical blow. Pens dropped to the table. Conversations died mid-sentence. The room's atmosphere shifted from anticipatory cruelty to stunned recognition. But the most dramatic reaction came from Arya herself. The color drained from her face as the words triggered a memory so powerful it was almost physical. Her hand moved instinctively to the metal hair clip on the table, the charred, twisted piece of jewelry that she carried everywhere but never explained. Suddenly, she was 17 again, trapped in the dormitory fire that had nearly claimed her life and the lives of 6 other students. The smoke, the confusion, the terror of being lost in a building that had become a maze of deadly corridors. And through it all, a voice calling out directions, a figure moving through the smoke with impossible calm, guiding them towards safety one by one. A young man who had broken protocol, ignored orders to evacuate, and stayed behind to make sure everyone got out. "Move toward my voice," Stay low. Follow the wall to your right. The same voice, older now but unmistakable in its steady certainty. Arya fumbled for the notebook she always carried, a leather-bound journal that had belonged to her father. Her hands trembled as she opened it to a page marked with his distinctive handwriting, words she had read countless times but never fully understood. A real friend never asks to be remembered. He simply stays. The quote, written in her father's careful script, had always puzzled her. He had claimed it came from the student who saved you, but she had never known what he meant. The fire had been chaos, confusion, a blur of smoke and fear that her teenage mind had never fully processed. Now hearing Ethan complete the quote with, "Until the fire is out," the pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Ethan continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent room. That night, 7 students made it out alive because someone stayed when protocol said to run. Real friendship isn't about being remembered. It's about being there when people need you most. The room was frozen in complete silence. Even the building's ambient sounds seemed muted, as if the ventilation system itself was holding its breath. Mia, watching from her corner seat, whispered to her friend, "Daddy never leaves when someone isn't safe yet." The innocent observation carried across the silent room, adding another layer to the unfolding revelation. This wasn't just about the past. It was about a pattern of behavior, a man who consistently chose other people's safety over his own convenience. An elderly teacher in the back row suddenly straightened, recognition dawning in her eyes. She had been there that night, had seen the young maintenance student who had turned back when everyone else was running forward. She had tried to find him afterward, to thank him, but he had simply disappeared. Arya stared at the hair clip on the table, the twisted metal that had been pulled from her hair, as someone carried her through smoke-filled corridors to safety. The person who had saved her, had pressed it into her palm as the ambulances arrived. "When the fire's out," he had said that night, "then we can worry about everything else." The same philosophy, the same voice, the same man who had just quietly revolutionized a room full of people who thought they understood what strength looked like. The silence stretched on, heavy with the weight of a past that had suddenly, powerfully, merged with the present. The silence was broken by the sharp scrape of a chair as the PTA chairwoman attempted to regain control of what had become an unexpectedly emotional situation. "While this is all very touching," she said, her voice carrying forced authority, "we're here to discuss practical matters, academic standards, program quality. We can't let personal history interfere with institutional decisions." A murmur of agreement rippled through several parents who were clearly uncomfortable with how the conversation had shifted away from their carefully planned agenda. They had come here to establish exclusive barriers, not to witness confessions about old fires and forgotten heroism. A board member with considerable financial influence leaned forward aggressively. "The music program requires students with genuine talent and proper preparation. We can't compromise excellence for sentiment. Children without adequate backgrounds simply hold back the others." His words were aimed directly at families like Ethan's, and everyone in the room understood the implication. This was about maintaining class distinctions disguised as academic standards. But Ethan was no longer just a maintenance worker being dismissed by his social betters. The revelation about the fire had shifted the room's dynamic, and his response carried a different kind of authority. He stood slowly, pulling out a building evacuation map from his work folder, the same outdated diagram he had noticed earlier in the library. "You want to talk about standards and preparation?" Ethan asked calmly, spreading the map across the conference table. "Let's discuss the safety standards for your premium music program." He pointed to a specific area on the diagram, the arts wing where the elite programs were housed. This evacuation plan shows the music rooms before the recent renovation. The current layout creates a bottleneck at the main exit. If there was an emergency during an evening concert or rehearsal, the students you're calling properly prepared would actually be in more danger than those in the general classrooms. The room shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the conversation they had planned to have. "Your premium program," Ethan continued, his voice maintaining its calm precision, "puts children in a space that violates basic safety protocols. The question isn't who deserves to be there. It's whether anyone should be there until the building meets proper emergency standards. The principal looked visibly uncomfortable. Building safety was expensive, less glamorous than donor recognition programs, and far less likely to generate positive publicity than elite student showcases. Arya found herself caught between past and present, memory and reality. She stared at the evacuation map, then at her charred hair clip, then at the notebook containing her father's incomplete quote. The metal clip seemed to pulse with significance. She had carried it for years without fully understanding why, a twisted piece of jewelry that most people would have discarded, but which she had treasured despite its damaged appearance. Now she understood. It wasn't just a memento from a traumatic night. It was a reminder of someone who had prioritized safety over protocol, who had stayed behind when others evacuated, who had made sure everyone got out alive. Suddenly, a sharp alarm pierced the air. The building's routine fire drill, announced monthly but always unexpected in its precise timing. The reaction was immediate and telling. Most parents looked around uncertainly, unsure whether this was real or routine. The principal fumbled for his phone, checking for official notifications. Several people remained seated, assuming someone else would take charge. But Ethan moved with practiced efficiency. "Single file," he said quietly, his voice carrying despite its calm tone. "Right shoulders toward the wall. Follow the green exit signs." Without drama or self-importance, he began guiding people toward the designated evacuation route. His movements were automatic, professional, born from years of training and experience. Stay together. Watch the person in front of you. No pushing. One by one, parents and staff began following his directions. Even those who had been dismissing him minutes earlier found themselves instinctively trusting his guidance in a moment of potential crisis. Arya stood slowly, her notebook still open in her hands. As she moved toward the exit, she watched Ethan check each row of seats, making sure no one was left behind, ensuring the most vulnerable were helped first. It was exactly what her father had described. Not heroic gestures or dramatic speeches, but quiet competence and absolute reliability when people needed it most. In the hallway, as the building emptied in orderly fashion, parents began realizing what had just happened. They had spent the afternoon discussing who deserved access to premium programs, while completely ignoring the fact that their building's safety systems were dangerously outdated. 2 minutes, Ethan announced as they reached the designated gathering area outside. That's how long it took to clear the boardroom and adjacent hallways. In a real fire, that's the difference between safety and catastrophe. The drill had been routine, but its timing had transformed it into something else entirely. A practical demonstration of what actually mattered when circumstances turned serious. A teacher who had been quietly observing spoke up. "In 20 years here, I've never seen an evacuation that smooth. Usually it's chaos and confusion." The statement hung in the air, an implicit acknowledgement that the man they had been dismissing as unqualified might actually possess the most essential qualification of all: the ability to keep people safe when it mattered most. Arya closed her notebook slowly, her fingers tracing the charred metal hair clip. The gap between past and present was closing, but the most important decisions were still ahead. The question was no longer about who remembered what, but about what they were going to do with that knowledge. The all-clear signal brought everyone back to the boardroom, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. Parents filed in quietly, their earlier confidence replaced by something more thoughtful, more uncertain. No one resumed their previous seats immediately. The evacuation had created a different kind of hierarchy, one based on competence rather than wealth, on practical wisdom rather than social position. Arya stood near the windows, still holding her father's notebook open to the page with his incomplete quote. The afternoon light caught the charred metal hair clip on the conference table, making it gleam despite its damaged surface. Without fanfare, she walked over and placed the twisted piece of jewelry directly next to Ethan's school badge. The contrast was striking: institutional authority beside personal memory, official recognition beside private truth. She spoke quietly, but her words carried to every corner of the now silent room. "I still remember. I just forgot how to remember correctly." Ethan nodded slightly but didn't reach for her hand, or attempt any dramatic reconciliation. Some acknowledgments were more powerful when left simple. The real decision hung in the air, unresolved and heavy with possibility. The PTA chairwoman cleared her throat, preparing to return to the original agenda about elite program standards. But Arya interrupted before the words could be spoken. The Voss Foundation will sponsor a new initiative, she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just rediscovered what leadership actually meant. Safety-first programming. Every student gets access to preparatory support first, then we identify talent through actual participation rather than artificial barriers. The room remained silent. No applause, no immediate agreement, but no outright opposition either. The proposal hung in the balance, waiting for institutional approval that might or might not come. Ethan removed his emergency whistle and placed it beside the hair clip and his badge on the table. 3 small objects that suddenly represented enormous questions about values, priorities, and the difference between safety and status. Mia opened her achievement booklet and carefully placed a gold star sticker on a fresh page. Today I learned about a new kind of emergency exit, she whispered to her friend. Arya closed her father's notebook without looking at the quote again. Some truths became more powerful when you stopped examining them and started living them. The camera slowly pulled away from the conference table, focusing on the 3 objects lying side by side: the whistle, the hair clip, and the badge. Outside the windows, students were practicing their own evacuation drill, following the green exit signs in orderly lines. The story ended not with resolution, but with potential, a question mark hanging over whether good intentions would survive the pressure of institutional inertia and social expectations. The building's emergency lighting continued to glow softly, ready for the next time someone would need to find their way to safety. If one calm sentence could silence a whole room, what would you say? Share in the comments and let us know where you're watching from so we can see how far this story has traveled.